Hello, I'm Richard Chambers, President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors. The vast majority of my blogs focus on the strategies and practices that internal auditors can deploy to generate value and succeed as professionals. But it is important to sometimes step back and examine actions that might derail this success. The most carefully laid internal audit career can come crashing down over a serious mistake. Get lazy, careless, or worse, fail to live up to the core principles for the professional practice of internal auditing, and an internal auditor may never recover. To address potential pitfalls, I have compiled a list of what I call internal audit sins that can ruin an otherwise bright career. The first sin is to publish an erroneous report. It is incomprehensible to me that anyone would intentionally allow an error, big or small, in an internal audit report. But a mistake can be equally devastating. A single incorrect observation can forever haunt you. That's because a retracted or amended report is rarely forgotten and can serve as a stark reminder of not just one failure, but the prospect that there may be others in the future. What's more, chances are good that the erroneous report will embarrass both your client and your boss, who I guarantee will have long memories. A second auditing offense is to intentionally submit incomplete or false work papers. Plain and simple, this is unethical, and there is no place for it in internal audit. You can assume that such an act will bring scrutiny to all of your work and to your job. A third potentially fatal error is to lose your temper with a client. When an internal audit client is in distress, they might strike out unfairly. You might want to fight back, especially if you feel like you're in the right, but it won't end well if you do. It's never appropriate to act out unprofessionally, and your actions will leave a lasting impression. I also want to mention here email, which can be misinterpreted even when the message is intended to be positive. Before you respond to an incendiary email from an unhappy client, I suggest you wait a bit before replying. Think deeply about how best to respond, and perhaps seek the advice from your boss before you hit that send key. Number 4 on the list of deadly internal auditing sins is auditing with an agenda. It's a huge ethics breach to undertake an audit with a conflict of interest. This will destroy any reputation you might have had for fair, unbiased auditing, especially if it appears that you're out to get someone. It really doesn't matter if the conflict of interest is real or perceived. It can be nearly impossible to recover. Betraying the bond of confidentiality is another auditing sin. There are certain ways that information gained during an internal audit should and should never be used. For example, if an auditor is inappropriately passing along information about a client, any trust between the two parties will be destroyed, and you can expect word to get around quickly. If you get a reputation as a gossip monger, I can promise you that you will struggle to ever have a candid conversation with management again. Simply, no one invites an indiscreet internal auditor for a return visit. Number 6 on my list of internal audit sins is violating company policies. This is about walking the talk. If a client thinks an internal auditor is flouting company policies, then the auditor shouldn't be surprised if the client ignores a recommendation regarding their own conformance to policies. For example, what would your client think if they learned you are not flying on a company-approved air carrier? Or worse, they find you comfortably seated in first class as they walk by headed to the coach class. This is not to say there aren't legitimate exceptions to a policy, but it must be justified and it must be rare. It's never okay for internal auditors to act as if the company's policies don't apply to them. Finally, issuing an internal audit report that is petty or doesn't add value is sure to be poorly received. We all know that internal auditing is not just about pointing out what's wrong, it's about helping management to accomplish their objectives. No one benefits if internal audit wastes time on unimportant details or an internal audit report contains inconsequential findings or recommendations. And I caution that while it might be tempting to reuse a previous audit program that found several errors, reperforming last year's audit is not necessarily the best way to add value. Any of the 7 sins I just mentioned can severely undermine the role and reputation of internal audit, and even one of them can wield a fatal blow to the perpetrator's career. I encourage you to instead focus on ways your career can soar from the ordinary to the extraordinary. I'm Richard Chambers, President and CEO of the Institute of Internal Auditors.